Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rekstad and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by Inogic, Britta and I delve into a listener question and talk about some of the nuances to campaigns and campaign responses. Maplytics by Inogic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 version 9.0 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablet. Inogic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality programming services. We thank Inogic for their sponsorship, and now, on with the show. And now we're back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good. How are you, Matt?
I am doing fantastic. I have that feeling again.
Is it that listener question?
Listener question time.
Yay!
Yes.
Keep them coming.
That's right. So this one comes from Suviet, who says, we recently discovered that inactive campaigns continue to receive campaign responses. We have several duplicate campaigns and decided instead of deleting the duplicate campaigns to simply deactivate them. It turns out deactivated campaigns still get campaign responses. What is the best strategy to deal with the duplicate campaigns? Disclosure. We do have duplicate detection rules, and yet we still end up with duplicate campaigns. All right, so good question. Few things to unpack in there. There's some stuff around the creation of campaigns. There's things around the actual automation of campaign responses coming in, the creation of those. Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about some of the duplicate detection rules, what might be going on in there. I'm ready to talk about this one. How about you?
I'm intrigued. There's a lot in here. Now, I think we're going to have to, because we don't have him here to ask, and we're not supposed to make assumptions in this role. We're supposed to have questions and go get answers. But this is kind of fun. Since we can't do that, we're going to have to make some assumptions.
Yes.
So I think this will be interesting.
Yeah, so I think, from as I read through this, and I've read it a few times to try to make sure that I'm understanding the question. I think we can take a few different angles at this to make sure that we cover it wherever these assumptions lie. But I think that when we're talking about continuing to receive campaign responses for one of those deactivated campaigns, my assumption here is that on that campaign, you were doing the create campaign responses from incoming email option for that, where if emails are coming in, they're being tracked, they're automatically going to generate that campaign response against the campaign, and that those are where those are still coming in. So it's that they're coming in for the deactivated, quote unquote, duplicate campaign that's in there. So that's kind of assumption number one. The other assumption that I make is that by duplicate campaigns, you mean separately created campaign records that, upon reflection, whatever reason there is, they all represented the same thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's an event series and you wanted to consolidate some of those events into a single one. Maybe it was multiple people wanted to individually track, their efforts and their leads toward the same single campaign. Think of it like a conference that people were going to. So there were 4 different campaigns all around that single conference, but those multiple campaign records had been kind of separately created. So those are a couple of assumptions I have coming into this.
Yeah, I think those are good assumptions. Okay.
So first off, what are some things that you might do in diving into this one?
So my assumption listening to this is that the emails coming in are valid. I mean, it makes sense. Even if we're done with a campaign, we might still get responses. That's still valuable data. Mm-hmm. So the assumption here, like you said, maybe there's 4 campaigns that all represent the same thing. The first thing, if I was jumping into this blind, is I want to know where these so-called duplicates are coming from. Yeah. Are users creating them? Do I have access permissions somewhere that's allowing people to create them? Am I doing something in automation that is triggering it? So I want to do some fact-finding on that.
That's like at the campaign level to begin with. You're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Definitely. I don't rely on duplicate detection rules. Mm-hmm. I just get heartbroken honestly, with duplicate detection rules. They just make me sad because they don't work for me. They work in incredibly specific scenarios, and there are a lot of things where they fail. So I would not be relying on duplicate detection to prevent that, either on a user side or an automation side. I'd be wanting to do something else. My first thought is making sure users who shouldn't be creating campaigns can't create campaigns.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're getting to duplicates of any kind is because people are allowed to create things that maybe they shouldn't. Maybe it should be consolidated.
Sure.
What I've done with some clients on other types of records is that sometimes people can submit an idea for something, but it has an approval process.
Yeah.
So maybe it doesn't go into the area everyone can use it until someone looks at it and, checks up
kind
a
of
field secured box or does something to say, yes, this one is real, you can use it.
Yeah, kind of an internal request to be able to create that campaign.
Yeah.
That's going to go through some level of review and validation to make sure, does this campaign actually exist?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's something I've used as well. And especially, with something like campaign, I hear that and I assume you're not talking, a volume of hundreds of different campaigns per day that are going in there. Typically, that's going to be a little bit lower volume, and putting that type of process in there is much more manageable than, say, doing it with something like leads going into the system. A lead going into the system and putting a barrier or approval or request process to put in a lead. That I look at those and I say, the volume of leads and the barrier to entry, that's going to be too high. But maybe with campaigns and how you're using them, that's somewhere where a request entity or a request process like that could be a really good one. Mm-hmm. And that's one for me. I think of it. That's a dead fit for Flow, for being able to do kind of a request and an approval to be able to put that out there, whether it's initiated, inside of Dynamics, or whether that's initiated kind of directly through Flow itself to put that in there. But I think that's one where it can, kind of look at some of the input, even maybe gather some of the information of similarly named or similar dates for campaigns and bring it back to the people who are going to be reviewing it, checking for that duplicate anyway, making sure this doesn't become a duplicate, and provide them more than just like a task to go and do a bunch of searches. Yeah, and in a Flow, we have some query capability too, so we can find similar campaigns. We can't do that in a workflow because we can't search in a workflow, but in a Flow, we can do that. So that's another kind of point in the points for Flow over workflow category. Yeah. Is that can be a really good piece for that. Something unfortunate here, because the issue we have is, let's say there's 4 campaigns that really all belong to one. We've deactivated 3 of them. We don't have a merge campaigns functionality like we have elsewhere. So if we have duplicate contacts, leads, or accounts, we can merge those together and all the activities follow along, and it's really nice. So, 2 contacts that are really the same person become one record, and everything just seamlessly comes together, which is really nice. We don't have that in campaigns. And so part of the issue is that these emails are coming back home, and they're coming back home to a campaign that was deactivated. Yeah. So that's another place where I think I would, I'd probably have some fun with workflow or Flow. As that new email comes in, I'd want to see what it's regarding, and is that record active? And maybe if it's regarding an inactive campaign, throw it into some kind of, whether it's reassigning it to the right one. If you weren't going to have it do crazy search, you wanted to build something really complex, you could just even throw them in a queue for yourself, saying, here are all the wrong places, they went to the wrong one. Yeah. Let's move them. Or you could write some cool automation to actually move them to the right place. It'd just be a little more work. Yeah, well, even as part of the deactivation process for the campaigns that are kind of the subordinate one that's being deactivated, before it gets deactivated, do something to have a relationship to the winning campaign and what that is. It makes it really easy to leverage a workflow to do some of that automation, or a Flow to do some of that automation, because then you have the link of like, oh, this was deactivated. If we have a new campaign response coming in, it should really be for this other campaign over here. Mm-hmm. And then, for the winning record in that situation, it's going to be blank. So it doesn't think about going anywhere in that situation. So that's a place that just a simple lookup field can save you so much in automation. Just the ability to add one lookup to the winning campaign, and it can save you a ton there. Yeah.
Also on the automation side, anytime, if I'm really worried that something is a duplicate, I'm probably going to put some kind of an auto number or it's kind of like a serial number concept on it so I can tell them apart. On the automation side, we only get to the minute timestamps. We don't get to the second timestamps. And so there are times that we don't get all the information that we need. Things look like they were all created at the same time. They weren't actually. Maybe someone quadruple clicked, and that's why it created it so many times. So if I do have a process creating these, I'd probably do something to give them a unique identifier so that I can tell them apart. We don't know if that is the issue, if they're getting created, if they're duplicates because some automation is running rogue, or if they're users. It's just part of the assumptions we have to make.
Yeah. So, a couple other things as I look at creative ways to solve this problem. When you're doing when you've got this problem, like let's say you're not able to do what we've talked about in kind of cutting off duplicate campaigns from being able to be created in the first place. Maybe there's something in your process where you just have to live with that fact. How can you still deal with this problem? One approach that could be out there is using some sort of either a master campaign or a parent campaign process, not necessarily using the out-of-the-box parent campaign functionality. Kind of evaluate whether that fits or whether you need to use, say, a custom entity to relate, kind of the same ones together. That way, if you have 5 different campaigns that are all really talking about the same thing, you have a common parent record that they can all look at, and you can use that to be able to start doing reporting off of. Now, the drawback there is that you're not going to get some of the out-of-the-box campaign reporting functionality that you would otherwise have and some of the charting functionality that you would otherwise have when you're using just an out-of-the-box campaign or campaign hierarchy that way. But it does give you kind of a very clear-cut way to say, here are all the things that were duplicates of each other. They're all related together in this way, and here is a single reportable relationship that we can use to go and build out the views, build out the reports, and so forth that are needed to be able to kind of get the information that's needed. That way, if you have these campaign responses that come in after the fact, they go against the now deactivated, subordinate campaign record, it's okay because you can still have those campaign responses be as part of your query using this common parent that's part of that. So just another way, because it's not always possible to cut off the creation of some records. You may have to live with some of those duplicates and deal with it after the fact.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, one other thing that I'd look at this is maybe take a step back and just make sure, validate the question of, if you're using this create campaign response from incoming email option, is it working for you? Like, are you happy with the response that you're getting there, or are there other pain points that are associated with this? It's really easy within the context of a single challenge to make a thumbs up, thumbs down on what this is, or just make the assumption like, oh, we have to keep checking that box no matter what, because reasons. Well, what are those reasons?
Yeah.
And are there other points? Are there other people in the organization that maybe feel pain with these campaign responses that are being automatically generated? Like, is that causing a problem? And maybe do you need to find an alternative way to kind of automate the creation of campaign responses rather than using that out of the box feature? Again, potential for workflow or flow to be able to look at that, and especially depending on who these emails are going into, people may be good or not good at tracking things in their general email. If you're using something like Flow, that can look at emails that are in somebody's inbox before they've even been tracked into Dynamics, if they meet specific criteria. So, there might be some of those things that actually make the process potentially easier for somebody depending on kind of what mailbox is it going to, and is there pain associated, and is it a lot of work, and is it getting the right response that you are looking for in getting the data into Dynamics that you can then report on the effectiveness of your campaigns. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm talking a lot. I mean, does that actually make sense? Do you agree with that kind of approach, or do you?
I do. I think it sounds good. This one's tricky because I want to ask him questions, and I think that's where I'm pausing so much. Is that as fun as assumptions are, it'd be nice to get some clarity here. I would also want to push back on if these really do have to be campaigns. Are they actually something else? And I would want to step back even further and look at the process. What are we trying to solve? At the end of the day, what is the report that we have to be able to build? What are we trying to prove?
Yeah.
And so I would want to look back, take a step back and say, just because these have always been campaigns, are they actually supposed to be campaigns? Or what are we trying to give the users, and what are we trying to give management?
Yeah.
And so I would want to step back. We can't do that because we have a paragraph and we can't ask more questions. So, but that is where my spidey senses are kind of pointing right now, is really looking at the whole process and what we're trying to accomplish. And we don't have those requirements. So it's a little tough.
Yeah. Well, and I just, as I look at this, I think back to the last portion he had in the question of the disclosure, which is they have duplicate detection rules and they still end up with duplicate campaigns. So I mean, I've certainly seen some challenges in how and why people are using duplicate detection rules. They're good fits for some things, but not for others. Mm-hmm. But when I see a comment like that, that's a great point for a conversation of, wait a second. So you're using duplicate detection rules. You're still getting duplicates. Why? Mm-hmm. Because that's one where, whether you're using campaign or using a custom entity, whatever, some other out of the box entity, if you're having that type of problem, that's not fixed by just using a different record type.
Yeah.
And that's why, when it's like, what is the process for how they're being created, and is there a level of automation in how these are being created? Are those coming over maybe as part of an integration from another system? I look at many organizations, and kind of marketing tools can be very quite varied across the organization, and not everyone is kind of running their marketing campaigns out of Dynamics. Perhaps the way these are coming in is via that integration, where the integration doesn't really have any awareness of a duplicate detection rule. Mm-hmm. It's more of an awareness thing of like, hey, this might be a duplicate. Do you still want to create it? You see that in the user interface, but if it's coming over in the kind of through the SDK or that kind of integration, that type of call, you're not going to have a person physically looking at and reviewing it at that point. So are you using one tool or multiple tools to be able to bring those over? Mm-hmm. And what is that process? What is that source system of information that you have there? And is there some automation there, or the way things are being named? Is it one record on the source system side, but it's becoming 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or more records on the Dynamics side? Like, kind of looking into that integration, and if it is in fact an integration, is that part of the source of the pain for doing that? And is there a different way to manage that integration?
Mm-hmm. Something else I think of when I see duplicates, this is just in general, not specific to campaigns. If I see a lot of duplicates, that's usually a sign in user adoption that I've made something too difficult, and my users are finding a way to click fast and get through it. Mm-hmm. And so they may have figured out how to circumvent a duplicate detection rule, or we just don't have rules tight enough as it is. So that's usually a sign that someone is frustrated or moving too fast or isn't aware of the issue. And so it might be that we've overcomplicated the design, that it is too much work, or maybe they're not reaping the benefit of associating things. So sometimes duplicates are also kind of a sign of trouble in a different area.
Yeah.
And once again, a call to look at the whole process and say, what are we trying to do for the user, and what data do we need at the end? And look at the whole thing comprehensively. Yeah. I think flow, I'd be really curious to see what Flow can do to help here. I'm seeing a lot of Flow things that pique my interest on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, we've been kind of all over the map here because as we talked about, we're having to make a lot of assumptions in this, but it's there's hopefully something out of kind of the many bases we've covered in this conversation that have been helpful. So with that, Sophia, thank you very much for sending in the question. Britta, any final thoughts?
None from me.
All right, I think we can call it a day.
Yep.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rekstad and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.